Now I'm going to begin my address, and I'm talking about living sustainably, but the first thing I want to do is just share with you a slide I've called Money In, Money Round and Money Out. What this slide is showing is that there's a number of ways of looking at the economy. This is generally how we look at the economy of the household, because we don't just focus on the money that's coming in, we focus on our spending as well. Now, conventional economic development doesn't really do a lot of the second. It does a lot of this stuff. How do we bring money into the area? Through having events, through attracting inward investment with industries. How can we get more tourists into the area? How can we get more people into the area? It's mainly a focus about this part of the economy. Whereas the conference is going to do something a wee bit different, and it's going to have its main focus on this area here, money circulating in the far north economy. How can we make the money turn over more when it is here in the far north? And then what can we do about slowing the rate at which the money leaves the far north economy? So it's going to be a wee bit different to something you might have heard before. To give you a bit of example of what I'm getting at, I'm going to share with you an anecdote. And this is a story about a travelling salesman who comes to a small rural town mid-afternoon one Friday, and he goes into the hotel, the only hotel in town. He's been there before. And he goes up to the publican and he says, can I grab a room for the night, Jack? And Jack says, local rugby team's got a big game on, and we've got a team from down country in. I've only got one back bedroom available. Is that all right? And the salesman says, well, I'm not quite sure whether I'm going to need it, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you $100 to just book it in case I need it. You stick that in the till. I'll rush around, do my calls, and see how I get on. So the travelling salesman shoots off outside. The publican's going about his business. Every time he opens the till, the $100 is there in his face. And it keeps on reminding him that he's got a rugby team coming in tonight and he hasn't paid the butcher for 2 weeks. And the $100 bill gets the better of him. He grabs it and he shoots out and he pops around to the butcher and he gives the butcher some of the money he owes him by giving him $100. The butcher's quite relieved to be paid for some of the meat that the publican's been owing him, and he shoots off across the road to the local garage owner because he's been owing the local garage owner quite a bit of money for some time for the set of tyres he had to put on the butcher delivery wagon. The butcher goes off, the garage owner whips the money out of the till, puts it in his pocket, and trots off down the road and knocks on a door and takes the $100 out of his pocket and gives it to an attractive young lady who just so happens to be the local lady of the night for the town. And she quietly pockets the money and he trots back to the garage. The lady of the night owes the hotelier some money for the rooms that she's been using, and she pops around to the publican and gives him the $100. And the publican puts it back in the till, and it's only been in the till for a few minutes when the travelling salesman comes in and says, I've got through all the calls I can make. I'm going to move on to the next town. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Can I have that $100 back, please? And the publican, relieved, takes it out of the till, gives it to the travelling salesman, and off he goes. Now, I'm not suggesting that's how we organise the economy of the far north, but what I am using the anecdote for is to show you that that money was diminished in no way by the number of times it changed hands. And it went round and it oiled the wheels for that little town. The concepts of living sustainably are about addressing the environment of the economy and the purposes we wish to have the economic system serve. In other words, we're talking about the ecology of the economy. Now, no one should take fright at the juxtaposition of those two terms because they as some of you may already know, the two words stem from the same root word, the Greek word oikos, which meant or described the wise management of the household. So whether we're responsible for doing this wise management of the household at the personal level, the community level, the regional, national or a global level, the basic purposes and principles of operation should stay the same. That we take or use only what we need, in capitals, need in capitals. And we ensure that others who come after us can do the same. And we do no harm to ecosystems or their services. For the moment, most of us are well shy of that mark. So it's therefore right and proper that this is our starting point for the Resilient Economies Conference. Calling this part the concept of sustainability. And without labouring the point too much, because the conference is really about resilient economies and not sustainability per se, humanity overshot the carrying capacity of the planet sometime around the middle of the 1970s. And since that point, it's not only been consuming the productive interest of the biosphere, but it's also been devouring the capital. This proven fact spurred the production of the United Nations report, Our Common Future, in 1985, and the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2007. Both reports spelt out the many ways in which humans are harming the fabric of the biosphere and the support systems that allow life to exist on this planet. This situation is totally unsustainable for humanity, even in the short term, and also for the tens of thousands of other species whose existence is being challenged, threatened, or jeopardised by the everyday activities of industrial civilization. Human activity, and in particular the activity of industrialised societies, is harming the Earth's biosphere in a myriad of ways, but most would be covered by the following. 1, we are usurping a vast proportion of the photosynthetic production of the Earth for the human, food and general consumption chains. Over 50% goes through human stomachs or through the other things that we use like clothing and so on. So we're leaving less than 50% of the photosynthetic power of the Earth to all the other animals that live on the planet. 2, utilising renewable resources at rates greater than the replacement rates. 3, utilising non-renewable resources at a rate that is causing the rapid demise of many of those resources forever. 4, producing waste materials that are polluting and destroying vast areas of the planet, including soils, groundwater, rivers, lakes, the oceans and atmosphere. 5, destroying key ecosystems and their functions that are critical to the vital ecosystem services all life on planet is totally reliant on. And 6, causing the mass extinction of thousands of species of microorganisms, fungi, plants, animals, and potentially humans. It is because of the unsustainable nature of current industrial civilization that the cry has come for humans to be sustainable in the way they live. That cry has been going on since at least 1985. However, industrial civilization is having huge difficulty in turning this situation around because virtually the whole of humanity is locked into the above unsustainable practices through a global economic monetary system that demands ever-increasing growth on last year's growth, in a frenzy to avoid collapse. Growth drives consumption, consumption feeds growth. It's one of the reasons why you're referred to as consumers rather than citizens, because governments need you to consume 100% of the time, and they don't need citizens for very much of the time just for voting and so on. To bring a focus to this link between our unsustainable endeavours and behaviours and the nature of the global economy, consider this. We are destroying the very fabric of our lives and that of every other form of life on the planet in an insane effort to sustain an insatiable and unsustainable economic and monetary system. In the 42 years since the unsustainable activity alarm was clearly heard, the best we've achieved are minor changes towards sustainability goals that have had little impact on the overall problems, while the damaging effects of our industrial economy continue largely unabated, and they're continuing at accelerating rates. In those 40 years, we've lost a lot of ground, and the task of turning the situation around is far more complex and difficult than it might have been 30 or 40 years ago. Now I'm going to talk about becoming sustainable, and we've got the slide up in front of us of the ecological footprint. For humanity, our nation, our district, our community, or our household to become sustainable, a wide range of sensible actions need to be taken. And the actions we need to take for our activities or way of life to become sustainable will depend on the context we're operating in and the scale we're operating on. I'm focusing my comments at the higher level, so I'm not stealing the thunder of the panellists and expert practitioners who are going to follow me after my talk. They in turn will focus at the level of the household and the community to give their talk a human scale. Professor William Rees of the University of British Columbia in Vancouver and a PhD student by the name of Matthias Wackenagel developed the concept that we know as the ecological footprint through the early years of the 1990s. It's a very useful comparative ecological impact tool. They originally called the appropriated carrying capacity, but it later got changed to make it something that people could use on a daily basis. The ecological footprint is a measure of the human demand on the Earth's ecosystems, or collectively, the Earth's biosphere. It's a standardised measure of demand for the natural capital of an ecosystem, contrasted with that ecosystem's ability or capacity to regenerate. It calculates the amount of biologically productive land and sea area necessary to supply the resources a human population consumes and how much area is required to assimilate the wastes that population produces. Using the ecological footprint assessment tool, it is possible to estimate how much of the Earth, or how many planet Earths, it takes to support humanity if everyone follows a given lifestyle. In 2007, humanity's total ecological footprint was estimated at 1.5 planet Earths. 1.5 planet Earths. In other words, in that year, humanity was using the planet's ecological services 1.5 times faster than the Earth could renew them. The rate is faster now. The figures aren't exact, but it's somewhere around about 1.82 or something like that. The figures coming out of China make it hard to be as defined as it was in 2007. But the situation is clearly unsustainable, as the growing mass of extinctions of other species on this planet should be telling us. Go ahead, next slide. The unit of measure for the ecological footprint is the global hectare, or GH. That's the area of productive and absorbative land and sea that we have here on the planet. It's been calculated at about 12 billion hectares that humanity can rely on to produce the resources we need and absorb the waste that we produce. When that figure is divided by the human population, you get an average value per capita of productive and absorptive land per person. It will be obvious to you that this figure is constantly decreasing as the human population rises, and also as the productive area of land and sea on the planet decreases. Using the figures from 2007, we find that the world's biocapacity at that time was 1.8 global hectares per person. But humans were basically using an average of 2.7 global hectares per person, giving an overuse or an overshoot beyond the Earth's carrying capacity of 0.9 global hectares per person, an overshoot of 50%. Of course, the Earth's resources and human impacts are not shared equally. And so, in a country like the United States of America, the ecological footprint per person calculates out at about 9 global hectares per person. If everyone on the planet were to have the same living standards as the average USA citizen had in 2007, it would have required 5 planet Earths to provide it. In other words, the citizens of the United States use 5 times the resources and have 5 times the environmental impact than the biocapacity of the planet can cope with. If we use the figures for the average New Zealand citizen, it's not much better. It translates to 4 planet Earths if everybody on the planet had the lifestyle of the average New Zealand citizen. For some to be overutilising the resources of the biosphere, many will obviously be having to get far less than their share. The average figure for a country like Eritrea is 0.36 global hectares per person. Using the global footprint data in this way highlights issues of global justice and injustice. Next slide. A second way to look at the ecological footprint data is to use the data on a country-by-country basis, establishing which countries are capable of living within their productive biocapacity and which are exceeding the productive capacities of their own territory. New Zealand, in spite of its relatively high living standard, fares relatively well in this statistic because we have a small population and a reasonably large productive land area. We can note that China actually requires 2.5 times its own land mass to feed, clothe, house and transport its people, and of course that's rising rapidly. The USA, a large country, requires 1.9 times in spite of its huge resource base. The United Kingdom requires 3.5 times the size of its country, and that's been in trouble since the 17th century. Hence it colonised and pillaged so much of the planet. Today the UK only produces enough food to feed the population of Greater London. The rest it has to import. Italy and Japan are far worse off. The figures for the planet as a whole, as mentioned earlier, were calculated at 1.5 Earths in 2007, and the figure in 2014 is worse, especially with the rise in materials and energy consumption in China, India and Brazil, which are not going to be stopping sometime soon. Next slide. Most of what I've referred to so far has been related to the current situation of how different nations are utilising resources and producing wastes in the present time, and how there are gross inequalities in those statistics and realities. This is only a small part of the tableau, however, when you realise how this situation has played out over the last 500 years or so. Africa, in particular, but other countries like China, went from having far superior forms of civil organisation, development and wealth than Europe had 500 years ago, to being the basket cases of the 20th century. The idea here is that if we are going to be true in the way that we consider the world around us, and we're going to pay homage to that, to the reality that we live in, the first consideration we should make whenever we're making any changes at all is the environment, the impact on the environment that we live in. Now, for at least 250 years, we've started at the bottom, and if we paid any lip service at all to the other two questions, it was just a form of tokenism in most cases in industrial societies. You know that you can't keep on doing the same thing if you don't want the same results to come at you. We know that we're in trouble. We're in trouble ecologically, we're in trouble economically, so we can't keep doing the same thing. And there are two bases here in this slide and the previous slide. If you go back through economic textbooks of the last 40, 50 years, they will show pictures of society and the environment as some sort of separate entity that society and the economy takes raw materials from and spits waste materials out to. In other words, we were somehow separate from that environment. We're not separate from the environment, we're an integral part of it. We rely on it totally for our very breath. And so we can't keep treating it in that way, that it's something that's separate from us. And we can't keep asking the questions the wrong way round. Some people might have this little but going on in their head, because most of the time when I talk to people about this, I get a but. There's no but. The but's your problem. There's no but. There's only turn it around. Otherwise, watch it fall over and be a part of the falling over. You can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. And the economy as it is at the moment, requires infinite growth. So we need a new economy. We need a new way of thinking about how that economy relates to the environment and how it relates to people. So this is the context that we're building. I'm going to introduce you now to the concepts of the natural step. In 1989, the Natural Step organisation was founded in Sweden by an eminent cancer researcher by the name of Karl-Henrik Robert. And we found out last night that one of our presenters in the room here has actually spent some time with Karl-Henrik Robert, so that's really nice, Lawrence. Karl-Henrik Robert became an important figure in the worldwide sustainability movement when he stated that human beings were creating the exact same conditions in their natural, built and social environments that enabled cancer cells to thrive and grow uncontrollably in the human body. Karl-Henrik Robert circulated his thoughts widely amongst eminent scientists, and the movement now known as the Natural Step was created as a consensus opinion by many leaders in the sustainability, ecological, biological and medical fields. There are two core parts to the Natural Step message that I'm going to share with you this morning. The first is something that's often called the funnel and bugle graph. This graph brilliantly shows the situation that humanity's in. If you imagine we're moving from the present to the future on this axis here, and this axis down this side, which doesn't actually exist, is about quantity and quality. Quantity and quality. The line here It says declining life-sustaining resources. So, the ecological services that we rely on, like the Earth's climate, the rainwater, the amount of oxygen we have in the air, the food that our soils produce, the food that the seas produce, and so on, they're declining like that. Undeniable. And at the same time, there's an increasing societal demand for resources. Line going like that. Because we all want more, and the ones who have been getting by on far less than they should have, it's their turn for more, and so there's a huge scramble for resources. And that's what's creating what the TNS movement call the funnel. Now, heading into this funnel, because we're talking about time going that way, there's a blob called 7.4 billion people, like a big clot going into a funnel. And we don't know how much that line is going to taper off. Does it come down here? Does that one go up there and meet it? We don't know that because we haven't been here before. Once or twice, small groups of humanity did, like the Easter Islanders and so on, so there may be some lessons there, but we don't know how far we are down the funnel. In relation to the sides of the funnel, we don't know how big the blob of 7.4 billion people is. We don't know how long we've got. But if we're realistic, we know that there's going to be some narrowing, and it's going to get a bit bumpy down here as we start to bounce off the edges of those resource depletions and those resource demands. And we know what humans do when things get a bit tight. They fight. They fight. All right? So it's not pleasant. So we've got to do something about this. And the TNS, luckily, talks about some of the ways out of this. So if we start to apply some of the solutions that are available to us, we may be able to stop the decline in our life-sustaining resources and start to get to a point where the earth is capable of a sustainable supply for a period of time. And then it may even be able to improve. The CO2 situation in the atmosphere may come back down to the levels that we've got now, which are pretty scary levels. The acidification of the oceans, which is starting to affect... How many people here in the oyster industry? Anybody here in the oyster industry? Do you know that they're starting to have really serious problems to get spat to form shells in the oyster industry? Okay? It's getting serious, folks. So if we can do that and get to a point where we have got a sustainable supply, if we can stop asking for more and get to sustainable demand, we might be able to get a pretty big section of our 7.4 billion people through that pipe. The transition period, this period here, the period of transition to a sustainable future over here, where we ask less of the earth and we give the earth time to regenerate. And we learn to live off renewable resources at the rate that they can replace themselves. This concept here, again from TNS, are the 4 conditions that they say are necessary for us to have a sustainable future. They tried not to have big long lists of what you should do if you're working in the rainforest, what you should do if you're working in the polar regions and all that sort of thing. They tried to distill all their ecological understandings down to some very simple rules. And so these rules here will work in any ecosystem in the world, in any society in the world, if they're followed sensibly. The first one is In a sustainable society, nature is not subject to systematically increasing concentrations of substances extracted from the Earth's crust. That's the arsenics and the cyanides and all those other things that we pull up when we destroy mountains for coal in the Appalachians, or when we're going for gold, or whatever else it is. We turn whole towns into toxic dumps. We don't have a lot of that in this country, but if you talk to people who come from certain parts of Australia or certain parts of the United States or China or Russia and so on, you'd be horrified at the stories some of those communities can tell. The second one is that in a sustainable society, nature is not subjected to systematically increasing concentrations of substances produced by society. These are the substances that nature's having a lot of difficulty reabsorbing for us. All right? The stuff we throw away in the sea because we deem it a waste, like our feces and so on, which is actually a really important material to be putting back into our ecosystems. The CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere, which is changing the Earth's climate and changing the sea's ability to support life. All of those sorts of things. Also, the third one is degradation of nature by physical means. So going out and bulldozing ecosystems. And finally, that in society, people are not subject to conditions that systemically undermine their capacity to meet their needs. Now, this word needs, I spelt needs out a little bit before. I'm going to come to that now. For those of you that know the United Nations definition of sustainability, you'll know that it talks about what? The United Nations Sustainable Development definition. Anybody want to have a quick go? That people should not do things when meeting their needs that jeopardise the needs of the future. Now, the weakness in that was that the needs were never defined. Nobody ever defined what were sensible needs for humanity. And so the concept of meeting basic needs, although they're at the core of the United Nations definition on sustainable development, by not having it defined so that governments, organisations and so on knew what they were actually doing, there's been a huge amount of abuse of this concept. Remember, we have known about this situation since the 1970s, and the United Nations told us about this in the 1980s. And yet we have continued to go ahead and just meet our so-called needs, which were really wants and desires rather than needs. The person that's done the best work in the area of human needs is a man by the name of Manfred Max Neef. Manfred Max Neef was a Chilean economist who left the world of high economy to become what is sometimes known as the barefoot economist, and he formed an organisation called CEPAR, and that set out a chart of the human needs. Max Neef talks about 9 human needs and 4 different aspects of those needs: the being, the having, the doing, and the interacting of those 9 basic needs. You've got it on your piece of paper, and you can Google Manfred Max Neef at the end of the conference. But it is critical to our movement forward that we understand what we're doing with sustainable development and meeting people's needs and not meeting people's insatiable desires and wants. For us here in the far north, I believe we have some basic needs that need to be addressed at the level of sustainability. One is the way we grow our food and fibre. Another is the way we create the most expensive and important possession we ever generally own, and that's our home. Another is the way we power our homes and lives in general. Another is the mechanisms we use to power our mobility and transport. and the other is the way we create and use money as a mechanism for exchange. The first three of those items are going to be introduced today by our panellists, Richard, John and Ruben.
Kia ora tātou katoa. Just like to say good morning to everybody, and wonderful to have you in our community. Looking forward to the discussions that were happening, and just like to thank the previous speakers on their address. If anyone wasn't depressed before then, we certainly felt like it and we needed that coffee. Now that we've had our coffee and we've dealt with all of the bad news, now we can get on to finding and talking and discussing about our solutions, because there are solutions. And everyone in this room's got one. We're not here to convert the converted. You are all in your own realm and in your own different occupation. You'll have your expertise. I'm more here to listen to what you've got to bring to us to help here in the Tai Tukaru, because we have such dire need for different whakaaro. I'm just going to introduce our panel, but I'd just like to ask a couple of questions first, because it's a bit one-sided and I don't know everybody who's here. So just like, if you just do a quick raise your hands, who here lives south of Auckland, has come from the south of Auckland, Tamaki Makaurau? Okay, who is from this side of Whangarei? Kapai? Okay, Kapai, so we kind of know who we're at. Who's from overseas? Manuhiri, you're from overseas? Fiji? Switzerland? Oh, kia ora. You're a Manuhiri Tuarangi. You're a very, very important person. Okay, so we want to hear from you from Switzerland. I was over there in Switzerland with my wife there. She's got relations there. Anyway, so I'm drifting. Some more questions. It's an election year. Who's voting? Who's not voting? Very good. Okay, that's a good question. One more question, I think, and then we'll get into our panel. What's the question that Okay, enough with questions. Just like to introduce our panel. Is Richard over here. He's going to be talking about organic farming and gardening, and hopefully sharing with us how to take it out to a local and a regional level. I've over here my young friend over here, John Kenderai. We're the same age, just he drinks vodka a lot, so that's why. No, he's a very cool guy. He's one of my mentors, and he's taught me a lot. He introduced me into the environmental sustainable issues 15, 20 years ago now, and so yeah, I've got a lot of admiration for this guy here. He does sustainability and everything, and me, I'll make it up as I go along, don't worry. But I'm very important that I want to be talking about how this affects Māori and how we as Māori, and I'm glad to see that there's a very large Māori presence here, how we are going to participate in this and how it's going to benefit our communities, because we need this here from our whānau. So yeah, kia ora tātou. I'm going to let Richard speak first. Okay, you go on there.
Hello. My name's Richard Van Alphen, and I'm a certified organic grower in the far north. I believe I inherited my passion for growing from my mother, who always had a vibrant veggie garden filled with good things. And I have fond memories of weeding and harvesting alongside the rows of curly kale, spinach, silver beet, beans and tomatoes, etc., along with grazing through the multiple fruit trees we had growing in our backyard. So growing with the staples and understanding them for me was the norm. So it was no surprise that I was to seek a path in the horticultural industry. Was I in for a big shock? This was industrial agriculture, and I learnt very quickly that it was a numbers game. Pump it out at all costs. If it looked like rain, you'd spray it with a fungicide. And if it did rain, you'd spray it straight after with a fungicide. If a sucky, bitey insect came to visit, you'd nail that with an insecticide. You'd spray herbicides on the growing area, hoe it up, and then any more weeds popped their heads up, you'd spray more herbicide. Then fertilise with agrochemicals, hoe it and plant. It seemed to me that the industry was waging this chemical warfare against nature. I certainly learnt how to commercially grow, yet the bizarre thing was this public's perception of the seemingly innate right to access cheap food. Yet it never sat well with me and always seemed at the expense of the environment and ultimately the health of the people eating it. I came to the realisation that humans, as a species, were the only ones on the planet poisoning their own food. I couldn't participate down this avenue anymore, so I had to leave. I also have never eaten store-bought celery ever again. Two really great things came out of this. First, I now had an understanding of what the commercialism of food really is. And second, I met my lovely wife-to-be who was working at a fruit and veggie shop I was supplying, so every cloud does have a silver lining. We both had a passion of where our food originates from. We decided not to travel on an OE as our friends were doing, but to buy a yacht and sail around New Zealand, as you do. We thought this may take a year or so. However, 5 years later, we sailed into Hauhora Harbour and have never left. We love the wildness, the abundance, and the people that live here. The very far north is an incredibly unique spot and so very much underrated. The only employment at the time was either forestry or fishing, and so I opted for fishing. And I spent 18 months working as a deckhand before gaining my skipper's ticket. And then I purchased a small fishing vessel, which I worked for several years. Still, I had unfinished business with the growing industry, and a scrub block came up for sale, and it seemed no one wanted it. It was miles from the nearest neighbour and power supply. We took one look at it and loved it. It was time to get our hands back in the soil. We researched organic growing and farming, which led me to a book written by the Biodynamic Association, and this had a deep resonance with me. Working in the lunar cycles, using nature's own energies, creating soil from compost, oxygenating water with flow forms. It all made sense. So here was a system that worked with nature and not against it. By hand we cleared what was the beginnings to become nature's own gardens, our orchard, garden and home. At this time the avocado industry was starting to bloom up on the peninsula, and my partner worked also there, where they had cherimoyas growing. We loved the flavour and look of the tree, but it was early days for this fruit, and the orchard pulled them out to put in more avocados. So an opportunity arose. If they were pulling them out, let's plant them, as we had no intention of exporting, and we did by sprouting the seed and grafting the trees ourselves, gambling that a local market would arise. We also researched growing garlic, and we saw some local heirloom seed, which has a Dalmatian origin, which started and still is a long-term relationship with it for us. We spent the next 2 years bulking our garlic seed and building up our soil by composting, as we were really just living on a sand dune. It's not the easiest for any kind of commercial growing, hilly and sandy. However, our expectation was just sustaining ourselves and not about making huge amounts of money. Year 3, we put in our big crop of garlic, and it was magnificent. Beautiful, large, well-formed bulbs, and we also had gained our organic certification at the time with the Far North Organic Growers and Producers Society, which enabled us to sell throughout the country with credibility. Unfortunately, also at this time, the government opened the floodgates to imported Chinese produce, one being garlic. The bottom then fell out of the market for New Zealand garlic growers as the cheap Chinese product flowed from one end of the country to the other. And by memory, I think there was approximately 30 large commercial garlic growers in this country, and within a season there was only 3. So what to do? 3 years of hard work saw us with a shed full of beautiful organic garlic, and no one wanted it for what it was really worth, and we were expected to meet the market price. The organic wholesalers were slow to move the produce, and the high markups some were putting on didn't help matters, sometimes triple of what we were being offered. We met with the fresh produce manager at Pack and Save here in Kaitaia and struck a deal that we would supply them if they would only put a minimal markup on our product. This was agreed to, and we managed to move all our garlic through this outlet, as well as erect signage promoting organics within the supermarket. We lost half our expected income though, so selling direct to the consumer was where we had to be. The middleman was the only one in our New Zealand growing economy that was making any money, and that had to change. We now had cherimoya trees starting to produce, avocado trees. We were contract growing chilies for Kaitaia Fire, a local chili sauce guy. Our own garlic seed was saved, and we also were propagating banana suckers from a local palm, which in our minds ticked all the boxes for being tough, drought resistant, and mighty tasty. So it was a fantastic food to add to our land. After a couple of years, we ended up with 500 banana palms planted. We didn't like having to sell out of the area, however the support just wasn't there for any kind of volume. So where to sell? We targeted Takapuna Market in Auckland, and we would load the Hilux up to its gunnels in produce, chuck in our young son and drive 5 hours to reach Takapuna by midnight to get in the queue to ensure entry at 5 a.m. And they were extremely tough times, but we always sold out, and we made some really great connections and were well supported. So it was mission accomplished. We had found our customer base, and we said to them, we can home deliver. So the 20 kg veggie fruit box was born. And using Fastways couriers, we sent as far south as Wanaka, and never a box was lost. It did open up a network for us, as friends would tell friends who wished to receive the veggie box, so we were extremely busy. As the growers' market in Whangarei went from strength to strength, saw us participate there for several seasons, which was great. Another following of like-minded consumers that cared for the environment and how their food was produced. We were then approached by a group who wished to form an authentic farmers market in Kerikeri. Would we be interested in being a storeholder there? You bet we would. It was even closer to home. So what's an authentic farmers market? There's really 3 golden rules for this type of market and their storeholders, which has been put together by some pretty clever people. 1, a farmer's market's a food market, so there's no arts, crafts, except for plants and flowers. 2, this food is produced within a defined local area, so for us it was the Northland region. And 3, the vendor must be directly involved in the growing or production process of this food. So there's no middlemen, on-sellers, wholesalers, retailers, etc. It really is all about attracting the right customer, one who wants to come and do their honest fruit and veggie shopping. So after being directly involved with markets from the past, the formation of the Kerikeri market was a lifeline for a lot of local growers. It gave the opportunity to showcase your produce direct to the local community and have a face or family standing behind the produce that they were purchasing. It provided a link that has been missing since industrial agriculture took over, and it's to reconnect consumers with the source. As the farmers' market gained momentum and the demand grew for our produce, it saw us cut back on our veggie box delivery to focus more on selling local. Local chefs from the surrounding restaurants were starting to shop there. As what more could a chef ask for? Quality, fresh, local produce on offer at a realistic price. So here's a model of the local economy staying local. Money spent in Northland stayed in Northland. Growers that would usually be sending 100% of their product out of the region were now attending a Paihia market on a Thursday, the growers market in Whangarei on a Saturday, and the Kerikeri farmers market on a Sunday, and were no longer having to rely on exporting their product out of the region just to survive. And I can't stress enough of what a powerful tool that is. As a grower, you now had some options. 2006 saw Cyclone Wati make its presence felt in the north, which is not what a grower needs, and during the height of that storm, saw a mini tornado come up our valley and snap our banana palms off at ground level. We stood there pretty gutted as lots of hard work and now income was lost. It takes 18 to 20 months in New Zealand to produce a bunch of bananas. Oh well, we just had to get over it and plant more garlic, and that's what we did. As the farmers' market grew and more support from the local community, the 2008 financial crisis didn't really affect local growers too much. Things had definitely slowed down. However, those that were supplying the staples were well supported. And why wouldn't you be? It was fresher, cheaper, and better quality than the supermarket. And not only was the local community supporting local growers, a bond had been formed, and the public that would shop at your store expected you to be there for them. And in the winter months, when things were colder and wetter, the expectation was that the public would still come out and support the local grower. And they did. Not only that, it became a tourist destination, and it didn't take long for the local businesses to get together, which saw the surrounding shops also start to open on a Sunday morning in Kerikeri. So the possibilities and the potentials. What I learnt out of all this is with community support, anything is possible. There is not a mountain high enough that cannot be climbed, so to me, if the community wishes to become more sustainable, they can. You just got to go out and do it. I am one small business, and there are potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of organic fruit veggie boxes to be filled out there. Growing organically for me has had a huge reward. I've had the satisfaction of feeding thousands of people over the years with nutritious, vibrant food, without chemical residues and without degrading my environment. I've grown intensively on my sand dune for 20 years, and my soil and growing beds are better now than when I started. I do not use the term sustainable lightly, and I'm always on the lookout to improve my footprint. Sustainability is intergenerational. It has to be flowing from one generation to the next, with each generation striving to leave it better than the last. It's like a garlic grower who does not replant, the seed will then be lost. I've lived off-grid for 25 years using solar energy. I own it, I control its usage, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, everybody. Thank you, Richard. I'm going to stand up here. I'm not used to talking when I'm sitting down. Just like to say thanks to everybody. Kia ora hone, hapai. Good to see some politicians in here, brave enough to be here today. I'd like to say hello to David over here from the community board. He does a lot of work around here, and the community board is very important to local initiatives. Warren Snow. It's good for him to be sitting in the back listening, even though he's got a lot of wealth of knowledge about local sustainable issues on a national level. And thanks, Di, for this opportunity. I'd like to take this opportunity, 15 minutes. Ring the bell when my 15 minutes is up, Ken. I don't stop. And talk about Māori economy, and talk about how it's underutilised and the potential that Māori economy has to offer to our region. and to our nation, and how it needs to be understood first in order for it to have value. I've got my friend over here, Sue Ferrens from Hauora. Her and her daughter last couple of years, they created this initiative called the Fire Festival. And the Fire Festival was up in Hauora, where Richard stays. It was in reaction to, let's do something during the winter, which is great that we're having this conference now in the middle of winter. Said, but I think our friend over here from Switzerland would understand this too, that in the winter over in Switzerland, they have all these festivals and they get together and have these parties in the middle of winter when it's miserable. Is that correct? I think you call it Christmas. Now, what I don't understand from a Māori perspective is why we are logging it out through the winter months. We're going to work. A lot of people couldn't come to the conference today because they had to work today. We don't have any breaks, and there's no more public holidays from Queen's birthday through to Labour weekend. And we're working really hard. And we're working, and it gets depressing when you don't have anything fun to look forward to. And so Sue and Yanni said, hey, let's have our own festival. And so we sit around on a bonfire, get everyone around, sing songs, have some beautiful food, which Sue's the founder of the Slow Food Movement, international movement. Sit around and eat and drink and be happy in the middle of a dowdy, depressing part of the year. Now, this is something that our people used to do mai rano. We called it matariki. Now, I think everyone heard of matariki? Everybody understand what matariki means and what it was used for? You see it's publicised a lot, right? Everybody understands about matariki. But does anyone actually utilise it in your community? Because I think if I could give this to your community, what the purpose of matariki is about, and you can take it back to your community, it would be really beneficial to you in your area.
Oh no, I was just going to say that midwinter at the same time back in Australia, and we always used to really celebrate that as a big community thing, but it's the exact same time.
Cool. Okay, ka pai. So, yeah. Kind of. Yeah. Matariki was about a beginning. Matariki was about doing something exactly like this conference is doing today. Matariki for our tūpuna was the beginning of getting prepared for the rest of the year. See, we never got prepared in the middle of summer, like what's happening in this country of New Zealand today. In Christmas, you have Christmas, and then you have New Year's, and then it's January the 1st, have the big party, Yahoo, countdown, and then you start your work here. And then everybody gets back into work mode, and then around the end of January or something like that, we start hitting our stride and we start getting in towards the year. The Māori year started in June, and that was because everybody had come together. It was a good time for us to sit around and talk. Miserable outside, it's cold, it's raining. What else do? You all come in together and you sit around together and you converse and you share and you understand what are the good things and the bad things that are happening in the community so that we can sit around and discuss them and improve on them for the next year. We did that right now in the middle of June when it was cold because there was less distractions. There was a whole range of reasons why we made that purpose during Matariki. The celestial and the wairua and everything going on like that, that all came around about as a necessity of living sustainably within our environment. That was the whole reason. Our tūpuna, I didn't get to stand here before you over 20 generations from our waka tinana by a fluke. My tūpuna were very, very, very sharp, and they made sure to hand on that information to us to ensure that we were here. It's the last 170 years we've kind of fallen off and we've gone and got a bit wobbly and we don't know what we're doing. Hence the statistics of today in Northland where Māori have the worst health, the worst education, and we're the most incarcerated people in the north. Now we will need to reverse that. And we need to reverse that together as a community and as a region. Māori, Pākehā, Tauiwi, we have to do this because it's an influence upon us, the Tauiwi culture. Your culture impacts on my household, whether or not I recognize it or not. In my household, my wife and I, kōrero Māori ngā wā katoa, and my children don't know Pākehā te reo. But they still get impacted upon it when they go outside the door, and they come out here into these communities, and they have to understand and converse with you, or even our own people who can't converse in their own little language. We have to get our child across that barrier of communication, and so they get into talking with us. So we all, what I'm saying is, we're all one community, whether we like it or not, or whether we do like it. I personally, I love it. I love being at a part of the conference like this. Usually I'm outside with my banner and my flag, and you just won't let me in. So this is a great opportunity for me to be in here, and you're a captive audience. In manner of speaking. But my point is, let's take this opportunity at this conference, and if we can work together and find some solutions to work together. My wife's looking at me a bit like, get to the point. My point is that Māori have a great amount of initiative to provide in this community. So we need a place to be able to stand at this and on this atamira, take this opportunity to share with you our aspirations and our ideas and our solutions. And they're going to benefit everybody. They're going to benefit everybody. Because our whakaaro does not have racial discrimination or anything. It's just about people. He aha te mea nui, he tangata. He tangata, he tangata. Especially our mokopuna and our tamariki. We want to make that a priority in this community. If we're going to be the happiest community in the country, we've got to put our children first. And I know that's a bit tough on the retirees, etc., our growing older, constituents. But we've got to take that leadership role. We're going to save this world, this conference. This conference is going to save the world because we're going to change our whakaaro on a regional level. First, here, let's fix things at home first before we start going out there. But if we don't fix things at home, we can't really contribute to the world. I hear a lot of this kōrero coming in from the government right now. One of them is that they're going to invest in deep sea oil drilling up here on my moana, up here in Tauranga. Said that's a battle that's coming. He said I refuse to lay down and allow that because it has so much detrimental impact upon the future of our people. And so we're going against that one up here. We've got a lot of issues that are happening right now. So many things that we're covering, trying to do this, trying to do that. A lot of you are volunteers. You're down at the school helping, then you go and do some gardens at someone else, then you'll go around at the marae, and we're all over the place. We're all over the place. Just say thank yous to you for all doing that. Without that work that you're doing out there in the community, this government would fall. This country would fall without all of the work that you're doing, those ones out at the back doing that voluntary work. You're probably all here out of your own pocket. You all come over here to try and find out how we can help the rest of our communities. I recognise that. I recognise that. Thank you very much for all of that. My kōrero comes from my heart. I don't have a flash slideshow, and I get confused by those machines anyway. I tried last night and ended up watching YouTube about some rubbish about homeless talents, and I was like, oh, jeez. I said, it's better if I just stand here and I talk about you honestly, try and connect with you about the importance of us taking this opportunity, these 2 days, and let's combine what Richard had with the organic passion and living sustainability, and using a bit of Jan's talk about the statistics and a bit of reality about economics, and tie that in with my awesome kōrero about rangatiratanga and wairua, and I tell you, we're going to come up with a great solution. Kia ora tātou, that's me.
Good morning, everybody. It's a little intimidating looking out here because I did a rough calculation and I figured there's somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 years of life experience in this room. And a lot of that experience has been very, very positive. It's been in areas which we can use and develop and take forward. And as Ruben says, in the process we save the world. Now, in terms of living sustainably, I found over the years that the best teacher for this was an empty bank balance. If you got no money, you get out there and you work out how to do it, how to survive. I had 17 years traveling overseas, and during that period I guess I worked for about 50% of the time. 50% of the time I traveled. I figured traveling was what I preferred. But during those years, I had my 4 meta questions. Based on Ken's, he had 3 meta questions. I had 4. And before I spent any money on anything, first of all, could I afford it? Second, did I need it? Third, would I really use it? And fourth, the most important, would it fit in my rucksack? There was almost inevitably a no in that period. So whatever money I earned during that period when I was working could last me a pretty long time. And I would go, I think I went for 1.5 years once without working, just traveling. So living sustainably is, again, as Ken was saying before, it's about defining your needs and how we go on those needs. But there's lots of sustainable technologies out there now which you can use, and these can make it a lot easier, we're not going back to the past. But so many people, you start talking about these things and they, we're going back to the bloody dark ages. Yeah, no, come on, you're going to ride to school on a mule or some damn thing. It's not true. There's some amazing technologies out there which we can use and we can incorporate into our lives. But I think we've got to look at some of these technologies that come up and actually question, are they going to make our lives better? Are they going to improve the quality of my life? And quite frankly, I'm much happier with a dumb phone than a smartphone. I don't need a smartphone. Okay, if it's good for you and it's part of your life and it's convenience, great, go for it. Personally, I'm happy with a dumb phone. Now, I'm totally biased in, of course, everything that I do. I've been off the grid for 20 years. I thought Reuben was going to talk about earth building. Looks like that's... Well, actually, there's a very interesting little thing here between Reuben and Richard and myself. We're all off the grid. We're all living in earth houses, and we're all growing organically. And I don't think any of us look as though we're suffering for it. And you can live a quality life. It's quality of life, not quantity. I'm lost in my notes, actually. I've gone off in all sorts of directions, so I'm just going to carry on. The thing is, when you're living sustainably in your own earth house, say, off the grid, you're in touch with everything about your life on a day-to-day basis in the environment. Because it is, as Ken was saying, again, the environment is your life support system. So when you look out in the morning and it's hosing down with rain, there's no sun around, that's not a day where you go and put the washing on and turn the heater on and clothes dryers and all this sort of stuff. You don't have the power. The energy's not there for that. So you go and do something else. Read a book maybe. But you don't do the vacuuming and the washing and all these things at the same time. You just spread it out. You work with nature and with what the environment is providing you with on that particular day. And I think this is important. And I think it's a far, far more fun life than just being able to go and push a button and it happens. You go to the toilet, you push a button and all that waste disappears. You don't have to deal with it. It's not your problem anymore. Well, I think it's about time we did start taking care of our own waste, taking responsibility for our own waste. It's not difficult, and it's a huge resource which we can use. Now, in terms of energy, over the years people have said, it's so expensive, these solar systems, power wind generators, whatever, batteries. Well, batteries are still expensive, I'm afraid. But solar panels are down. I got an email the other day, 70 cents a watt for a solar panel. 10 years ago, you're looking at $10 a watt. Prices have just plummeted. You could set up a very simple system on a small cottage for probably not much more than $5,000 these days. There are people out there, banks even, who will go out and put the money up for a solar system, and the only security they will take is on the system itself. Okay, and, sure, they're making their buck. They're 5, 6, 7%, I don't know what they're charging, but these systems are now within the reach of everybody. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a backlash coming, I think, from the big power companies, the big energy companies. They see people making inroads into their money train. And politically, I know in Australia, this is happening now. The big companies are getting the government to get rid of the subsidies. I think Germany's dropped a lot of the subsidies for feed-in tariffs for grid connect systems. It's a battle, but the thing is we can all do it, and we can all run our own lives off the grid independently and working together. The other thing is up in the far north here, we've got a great growing climate for eucalypts, for copper sink. I was over in Ecuador, very fortunately, last year, and I saw all these eucalypt plantations. They're all looking pretty straggly, and all half cut down. And I wondered for a little bit what it was, but it was all copper sink. And these things grow back. 5 years, you've replaced whatever you've cut down. And so it's a continuing source of firewood. Huge potential up here for doing that sort of thing. It's a local, sustainable business. We live in a rural environment, gives us greater choice over that the poor, misguided people who live in big cities have. I don't know how they do it, because they're not in touch with the earth. They don't know what's happening on an everyday basis. There was a wonderful story many years ago I heard about a bunch of do-gooders out with some so-called primitive people, giving them clothes, shoes, all these modern things that we're supposed to need. And this old lady looked at these shoes and she said, "But how will I touch the earth? How will I feel the earth?" I don't think it's a question we even ask anymore. How do we feel the earth? But I think we are slowly becoming aware that it's something that we do need to do. If we don't feel the earth, we don't live, basically. I think I've said enough. I think there's lots of good time ahead for everybody to talk and ask questions, and work together. And finish with just saying, long live the Muka Republic.
One of the things that really strikes me when people talk about being off the grid, and the far north has a reputation for working off the grid, of being non-compliant with legislation and doing things our own way. I wanted to make a point about the way Ruben and Hine did it that was different in terms of the relationship, especially with council. Now, when we're talking about building houses, councils don't design that system, government does. And there are national standards around building. And what they did was successfully navigated, because of their massive tolerance and their fortitude, to work with people who didn't understand what they were trying to do, and they provided them an education. The whole thing was quite a learning journey for everybody involved, and a very exciting opportunity because of the model that they presented for everyone else to work to when it comes to designing your off-the-grid home. They did it legally, with compliance and with agreement of the council eventually. Quite a lesson. We haven't managed to capture all of that yet, but it's one effort, it's one example of doing things differently. And one of the things I'd like to see in the breakout session is people to come to expose where they've been frustrated with the system. It's not the person that's sitting at the counter at council. They didn't design the system. When you come up with a barrier or something that's hindering how you'd like to do things, write it down in your breakout group. We need to know those examples, because it's only through identifying them we can start working on solutions jointly. And I think that's what Di and John and the other councillors here were hoping for, is to get a really clear signal from the communities about what's not working, because that's their part of it. They can't do all the rest of it. They can say, what's not working in terms of council's part and how can they address it. So,
Thank you, Jane.
Kia ora. Thank you, Jan. Could I just explain why we went through the consent process? Because there's a lot of us rebels up here in the north who, power to the people, don't want to do any of that stuff. The reason why Henny and I chose to go through the consent process and successfully complete all of what Jan said, code of compliance, was because for too long our people have been hiding on their own land underneath a tree or in an illegal building. And that it's got to stop, and it was too hard for Henny and I to share our kōrero out there if it was deemed illegal. We have been taking this kōrero out there to all of our communities around the Tai Tukere, trying to help families. We've got 30 families on our books. We're going to help a family in Pukeputo. We're doing one in Aipara now, etc., etc. But we could not have been able to do it if it didn't have that legal requirement. And we, of course, also couldn't have had the support of Parliament, the ministers that were in there. And there are a couple in there that support us, but they didn't have the power behind them if we didn't go through that legal process. So, legal processes, I know our whānau, we're all mana motu hake, rangatiratanga, and we refuse to see the power of the government and oppress us. But if we're talking about our kids' health and safety here, we're talking about their lives, we're talking about their well-being. And for me, my children's health is paramount to everything. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
My name's Gail. I live down in the Hokianga, a small farm where organic growers, not certified though. I just wanted to make a couple of points. One was about the whole issue of organic gardening or gardening in general, food production, and the concept of resilience in gardening, and a plea for a concept of diversity. Diversity is so important if we're talking about gardening in a resilient way. Organic, like monoculture, is a really damaging part of the existing food, the main paradigm food production system. And organic monoculture is obviously better than non-organic monoculture, but I feel really strongly that we need diversity in what we grow. It's an insurance policy. It means that we don't lose all our food if we lose one thing. It helps us in pest control. It's an amazingly important concept, and the concept of diversity isn't just about growing, it's about people and skills and sharing and community, because we can't all do everything, so bringing everyone together like this is a fantastic opportunity. And the second thing I wanted to just briefly say was about this issue of council and regulations, and I absolutely understand that council has to work within a regulatory framework that isn't set by them, but they have to interpret how they actually enforce that. And as an example, I believe that the council should be taking more of an enabling approach, so that if people have questions, that they actually can have almost like example solutions that they do. Recently, we inherited a house with a septic tank. The septic tank failed. I get the letter from the council that tells me I have to replace it with a septic tank. Why were there no other alternatives on the initial letter? That's the first point. The second point is then I ring up and I say, I want to put in a composting toilet. They say, consult the list of TP58 engineers. I have to ring an engineer who then charges me to tell me what I can do. There are lots of simple things that council could do in an enabling manner. There are many people who are concerned about trying to do things in a good way, and the regulatory system needs to be there to enable and protect, to enable people to protect the environment, not to stop people from protecting the environment.
Thank you, Gail. Next.
I'd like to respond briefly to Jane, and with thanks to the previous speaker. It's my understanding that the Resource Management Act, as it presently stands, is an enabling piece of legislation, and that it's designed to not impose culturally, economically, or in any other way on the local people. And I think it's often been misinterpreted and made to impose severely on people. So I don't know what any changes to it will bring, but in the past it has served us well by us standing on its provisions for our protection. The other thing I'd like to mention is that, I'm sorry I can't name the document, but it's one that Council has access to and works with. Way down, buried at the very bottom of one of the sections, subsection J or K, is a provision that Council can not require, it has the choice to not require all the usual paraphernalia regarding buildings if it is satisfied that a building does not endanger the inhabitants or the neighbours or anyone visiting, if it's structurally sound, sanitary and safe. And to me, that's the bottom line for any building. It's common sense, and it doesn't take very many words to nail it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for the panel. I've been trying to purchase a place to live in Rawene. I have a certain, not very large amount of money, and I've come across what I call a lofty garage, which could be turned into a dwelling. The complexity for me, relating to the meta questions, among other things, is I could do it in a way that I think would render it illegal, but seems much more sustainable on one level, in as much as I could put in windows and doors that were second-hand and not double-glazed, etc. Or I could go the double glazing, really good insulation, and that would seem to be more sustainable in a long-term way. And I think somewhere in the middle there is probably a solution, but I'd really be interested in your comments.
Okay, I think there's a whole series of issues here. Personally, I don't believe double glazing is necessary up this far north, but it depends on what thermal mass you have in the building, whether you're going to be able to store heat or not. Yeah, I think you've just got to do what is right for you to do. I would hate to give advice on that, because when I talk to people about alternative energy systems, I really like to talk about them and give as much of the information as I can. But I do not want to advise people. I think it has to be everybody's individual choice at the end. Get as much information as you can, and then you make your choice.
Kia ora. I got a question to reply to that, but my question to everyone here is, who uses the internet? Okay then, okay, because we have that problem in Māori housing, bad condensation, dripping off the ceilings, how much water that gets in. So we're looking for other solutions, and we got double glazing, but I believe it's worth the money, to be honest, especially if it's for your health. You'll get your money back from having good health, especially if you've got a family there. But there are other products that are coming out of other countries, and we use the net to communicate. The great thing about the internet is it reduces the size of the world, and you can go out there and find other solutions that you normally wouldn't find in a little place like Kaitaia, and there's only 2 shops, Maratina and Carter's, for solution. That's been blown out the door now, and I can jump onto the internet and I can type in a problem. I'll go in and I'll type in a problem, bad windows, and press the button, then all of this huge information comes up, and then it can start find a selection in that process that John's talking about, what's going to suit you.
I live in South Hokianga, been here 20 years and have been off the grid in that time with a composting toilet, and I've been on a restricted income. For living sustainably, I would suggest that we start with the young and we educate them to the difference between needs and wants. Because until they understand the difference between needs and wants, we will not make any progress. And for people who are looking at going off the grid, you learn by restricting your electrical equipment and such not before you convert. That's how I did. I sold my house in Oakwood to come over to South Hokianga. But unless we have the... Sorry, unless we educate the young ones to understand that they shouldn't necessarily want to go and spend all their money at McDonald's and the warehouse, then we're never going to make any progress. And it's the youth of this who are really going to carry sustainability forward.
I have always felt that the North has a wealth that doesn't include money. And I've always thought that in the years that I've lived here, the land that belongs to the Māori will save the North, will take the North into a future that perhaps will not be an opportunity for many areas left in the world. And I would like to acknowledge the growing of organic food, and would like to then pick up on what Henny and Ruben have said about our resources. The North has a wealth of resources that is not based around money, but is based around our ocean floor and the ability to grow food in that area and on the land that is already productive in many ways with the honey that can be produced off some of that land. I would like to put to the floor for the duration of this conference about ideas to come from it as to how we can again harvest from the sea, restock the sea first, and maintain that. And I've heard a lot of people speak here about regulations and boundaries that we must conform to regarding local authority. But are we not all local authority on these matters? Are we not all responsible to ensure that the seabed once again can feed us?
I just wanted to talk about what we as Māori value the most. We value our family and our whānaus and how we bring them up. We value the land that we live on and the land that we own. We may not be rich in money, but we're rich in land, so we've been told. We're land rich. But we can't be land rich when we owe rates. And we're rated according to how the land is and where you live. When we're living in land like Kerikeri, where everything is productive there, and we have small land somewhere close in that vicinity, we are rated in a township rating which is totally out of our means and unaffordable. And what I would like to see is that council will find the time to talk with us, the people who own their land, the Māori people who own their land, that we can come to some terms of how we can settle overdue rates, that there will be some plan put in place where we can deal to our overdue land rates so that we can live in peace and work on our land and be productive like everybody else. And we as people, we have been brought up in a poor environment, but we've learned to survive. We are survivors. You can take money away from us, but you can't take our living away from us because we have been used to it. And because we've been brought up like that, we are survivors. We can live without money, but we need our land to be able to continue to be productive on behalf of our children and our children to come. Thank you.
And I really have a question for all of us. What is it with us, or our government, or our organizations, that we really don't trust people closest to the problem to make the decision? I see this new localism as a great catchword, but the actual trend of government is unitary authority, centralizing, to the point where somebody in Wall Street is going to make the decision for you. And as an American, I don't trust those bastards, and I'm related to them. I want to know, I want personally to see that the decisions that affect me are made within 15 kilometers of me.
You may be interested to know that New Zealand is one of the most centrally controlled countries in the world, I found out recently, with 91% of the tax money spent by those bandits in Wellington and only 9% of it spent locally. We can't do anything about the rates because that too is the prerogative of those bandits in Wellington. Despite the fact we had a visit from a guy from the New Zealand Initiative who told us what we should be doing about creating local taxes, but then told us, well, you can't do it because it's only government in Wellington. But folks, one thing we can do, and that is have our own money. It's legal, it's viable, it's doable. We already have it up here to some degree, and it is my sincere hope that anybody here who doesn't believe that local currency is viable and doable will go away with a 180-degree change of mind. Thanks.